But as he squinted against the night, he saw it again, a gentle, warm glow, flickering like a tiny sun in the vast emptiness. Jacob's heart lifted slightly. The light promised warmth, safety, and perhaps someone to help him. He guided his horse carefully, step by step, toward the glow. Every inch closer felt like a victory, though his body reminded him with aches and shivers that he was far from safe.
As he approached, he realized the light came from a small cabin.
Smoke curled lazily from its chimney, and the door was slightly open. A soft glow from the fire inside spilled into the night, casting gentle shadows on the sand. Jacob's heart pounded, not from fear, but from hope. He had not expected to find anyone here, and yet here was a sign of life. He dismounted, feeling his legs tremble under the weight of his own body. The cold air made him shiver again, and the fever made every movement feel like climbing a mountain. From inside the cabin came a voice. It was calm and clear, yet gentle, carrying a warmth Jacob hadn't felt in days.
"Hello? Is someone there?" the voice called.
Jacob's throat was dry, and he croaked out, I need help." The voice paused for a moment, then footsteps approached. Soon, a young woman appeared in the doorway. She had hair that shone softly in the firelight, and eyes that seemed to see right into Jacob's weary soul. She didn't look frightened. Instead, she looked concerned. "You're far from home," she said softly, her voice carrying a comforting rhythm.
"Come in. Sit by the fire."
"You look like you need rest." Jacob managed a weak nod, grateful for the kindness in her voice. He stepped inside slowly, feeling the warmth of the fire touch his chilled body. The room was simple but cozy, filled with the smell of burning wood and a hint of herbs.
The woman gestured to a chair near the fire. "Here, sit."
"I'll get you some tea." Jacob sank into the chair, feeling the heat from the fire slowly creep into his frozen limbs. His body felt heavy, almost like lead, and he could barely lift his arms. The woman, Clara, he would later learn, moved quietly around the room, preparing something with practiced ease. She set a cup of steaming tea in front of him and gave a small, encouraging smile. "Drink this slowly. It will help you warm up,"
She said.
Jacob nodded again, his voice too weak to speak, but his eyes said thank you. As he sipped the tea, he felt the fever's edge ease slightly. The warmth of the liquid spread through him, calming the shivers that had racked his body. He took another small sip, and then another, feeling the gentle care of someone who didn't judge him, someone who simply wanted to help. He had spent so many nights alone, riding the endless trails, that he had forgotten what it felt like to be cared for. This simple act, the warmth of a cup, the sound of a gentle voice, felt like a miracle. Clara moved closer to the fire, sitting across from him, her eyes never leaving him. "You've been writing for days," she said, almost as if reading his mind. "Your body needs rest, and your fever needs to break. Don't worry about anything else."
"Just sleep. I'll watch the fire."
Her words were steady, almost commanding, yet comforting at the same time. Jacob felt a strange sense of relief wash over him.
He wasn't used to trusting anyone so easily, but something about her presence made him believe that for the first time in days he was safe.
He tried to speak, to thank her properly, but his voice failed him again.
Instead, he gave a weak nod and leaned back, letting the heat from the fire soak into his aching muscles. His eyes grew heavy, and the world outside the cabin seemed to blur into shadows. Clara watched him closely, noticing every small movement, every twitch of discomfort. She adjusted the firewood, making sure the flames burned steadily, providing both warmth and light. As Jacob's eyes closed, his mind drifted. He thought about the trails he had traveled, the lonely nights, the wild animals he had faced, and the storms he had survived. All of it seemed distant now, replaced by the small glowing cabin and the calm presence of Clara. He realized how exhausted he truly was, not just physically, but in his spirit. For so long he had been alone, relying only on himself. And yet here he was, cared for by a stranger who seemed to understand without question. Outside, the desert wind howled, rustling the dry bushes and shifting the sands. Jacob felt the cool draft at the edges of the cabin, but did not care. Inside, the warmth of the fire and the presence of Clara created a bubble of safety in the harsh, unforgiving desert. He drifted deeper into sleep, his body finally giving in, his mind easing into a rare, peaceful rest. Clara kept her watch, her eyes on the fire, her ears attuned to every sound of the night. She did not speak, but her silence was filled with quiet care and unwavering attention. Hours passed, the fire crackling softly, casting shadows that danced across the walls. Clara occasionally added a log, keeping the flame steady, and checked on Jacob without waking him. She whispered softly to herself at times, words of encouragement she didn't expect him to hear. The bond between them, though unspoken, began to form in those silent hours. A bond built on trust, care, and the simple act of being there for someone when they needed it most. When Jacob stirred slightly in his sleep, she adjusted his blanket and placed a hand gently on his shoulder. He murmured something incomprehensible, a fragment of a dream or a thought, and then relaxed again. Clara smiled faintly, realizing that even in sleep he was slowly healing. Her heart felt a quiet warmth, different from the fire, a connection she could not yet explain. She continued her vigil, keeping the cabin safe and the fire alive, knowing that her care was more than just for survival, it was for hope. The night stretched on, endless and quiet, filled only with the sound of the fire and the occasional whisper of the wind. For Jacob, it was a night of rest he had long forgotten he deserved. For Clara, it was a night of silent guardianship, a quiet act of kindness that felt both necessary and rewarding. And though neither spoke of it, both felt the beginnings of something deeper, a recognition that in the vast, lonely desert, two lives had intersected, and that intersection might change them both forever. Breaths. As the first hints of dawn began to touch the edges of the desert sky, the fire still burned steadily, casting a warm glow over the small cabin. Jacob remained asleep, his breathing deep and even, his fever slowly receding. Clara watched him one last time before tending to the fire, knowing that soon he would wake, and their journey, one of recovery, trust, and perhaps friendship, would truly begin. But for now, the night held them in its quiet embrace, and, for the first time in a long while, the desert felt less lonely. The first rays of dawn barely touched the desert sky, painting it in soft shades of pink and orange, when Jacob began to stir. Desk, his eyes fluttered open, still heavy with sleep, and he felt a strange warmth around him. The fire crackled softly in the small cabin, casting long shadows on the walls. For a moment he couldn't remember where he was. Then it all came back. The desert, the ride, the cold night, and the mysterious glow he had followed. His body felt weak, his muscles sore, and a dull headache throbbed behind his eyes. The fever had not left completely. Clara was already awake, sitting quietly near the fire. She had not slept much, keeping a careful watch over him through the night. Her movements were gentle but purposeful as she arranged the firewood and added a small piece of dried herb to the flames, filling the room with a faint, soothing aroma. When she noticed Jacob stirring, she offered him a small, comforting smile. "Good morning," she said softly. "You slept a lot, but your fever hasn't completely gone. We need to take it slow." Jacob tried to speak, but his throat felt dry and raw. A weak rasp came out instead of words. Clara reached over and handed him the cup of tea she had prepared earlier. "Drink this slowly," she said. It will help your fever and ease your body." Jacob accepted the cup with shaking hands, grateful for the warmth and the care behind her words. As he sipped, he felt a faint relief. The heat of the tea spreading through his chest, calming some of the aches and chills that had made him feel so fragile. He leaned back slightly, closing his eyes again, exhausted. Clara did not speak further but continued to watch him. Noticing every small sign of discomfort, she moved quietly around the room, fetching more herbs and arranging the blankets around him to keep him warm. She did not rush him, did not demand anything from him. She simply waited, a steady presence, the firelight reflecting in her calm eyes. As the day began to warm the desert outside, Jacob's fever grew stronger again. His skin felt hot, and a wave of dizziness swept over him. He coughed violently, clutching his chest, and for a moment he felt like he might collapse. Clara moved instantly, helping him lean forward and placing a cool, damp cloth on his forehead. "It's all right," she whispered. "I'm here." "Just breathe slowly. I'll take care of you." Her voice was steady, confident, and gentle all at once. For the first time in days, Jacob felt like someone truly understood the struggle he was facing. The fever made him restless. He muttered fragments of thoughts, words he could barely form. The trail. Too long lost. His body shook, yet his mind wandered through memories he had not thought about in years. Clara listened patiently, never interrupting, offering only comfort when needed. She gently guided him to drink water and held his hand when his strength failed him. "You're not alone," she said softly. "I've got the fire, and I've got you. Sleep if you need to. I'll be right here." Hours passed like this. The sun climbed higher, casting sharp rays across the desert outside the cabin windows. Jacob's fever rose and fell, pulling him into moments of delirious thought. In those moments he spoke freely, revealing parts of himself that he had kept hidden from everyone else. He spoke of his lonely childhood, the hard work on his family's ranch, the loss of friends along the trail, and the endless nights he had spent under the stars feeling forgotten. Clara listened without judgment, nodding quietly, her presence a quiet anchor in his stormy mind. At one point he murmured, I never thought someone would care." His voice was barely a whisper, broken by coughs and the fever that raged through him. Clara squeezed his hand gently. "People care in unexpected ways," she replied softly. "And sometimes even strangers can become the people we trust the most." Her words hung in the room, gentle but firm, carrying warmth like the fire at their center. Jacob felt a flicker of hope he hadn't known for days. Outside, the wind rustled through the desert brush, carrying with it the faint cries of distant birds in the shifting sands. The cabin felt like a small sanctuary, a safe space against the harsh, lonely desert. Jacob, in his fevered state, became aware of every detail. The comforting smell of burning wood, the softness of the blankets, the quiet attentiveness of Clara. He felt a strange mix of vulnerability and relief. For a man who had spent his life relying solely on his own strength, this surrender to care was new and strange, yet oddly comforting. Clara moved closer to him as he settled into a more comfortable position. She adjusted his blankets, making sure he was warm but not overheated. She brought him more water and encouraged him to take small sips, speaking softly so as not to startle him. "Your body is fighting hard," she said. "You just need to let it do its work." "I'll stay with you until you're better." Jacob's eyes met hers briefly, full of gratitude and something he could not name. He tried to speak, but the words failed him. He simply nodded, too weak for anything else. As the day wore on, Jacob's fever caused him to drift in and out of sleep. During these moments, he spoke in fragments. Stories of his adventures, fears he had buried long ago, and regrets he wished he could undo. Clara listened, responding with gentle encouragement, sometimes laughing softly at small stories, sometimes offering quiet reassurance when he spoke of loss and loneliness. Their conversation was slow and fragmented, but it built a connection neither of them could deny. A sudden noise outside startled them both. The wind had shifted, and the sound of rattling branches made Jacob flinch in his weakened state. Clara moved quickly, checking the cabin door and windows, ensuring nothing dangerous had come near.
"It's all right," she said, settling back by his side.
The desert can be loud, but we're safe here. Jacob, feeling protected for the first time in days, relaxed slightly. He realized that his vulnerability did not make him weak. It allowed someone else to step in and care for him in ways he had not imagined. As evening approached, the sun dipped low, casting golden light through the cabin windows. Jacob's fever had not fully subsided, but the steady care of Clara made it bearable. He began to feel a quiet warmth beyond the fire, something in her presence, a comfort that eased the pain of his body and soul. He realized he could rest without fear, and in that rest his mind could wander without torment. Throughout the night, Clara continued her watch. She added logs to the fire, kept his blankets adjusted, and whispered softly to him whenever he murmured in his sleep. She felt a strange connection forming, not just because she was helping him, but because she recognized in him a resilience and honesty that few people showed. Even in weakness, he had a quiet strength, a determination that made her respect him more than words could express. Jacob's fever dreams were vivid. He saw himself riding across endless deserts, chased by memories and regrets, yet always guided by a warm light. He heard Clara's voice in his dreams, gentle and reassuring, reminding him that he was not alone. In the dream, he reached out, and her hand met his, steady and strong. Even in sleep, he felt the power of care and trust, a bond forming that would not be easily broken. By the end of the second day, Jacob's fever had begun to ease. He was still weak, but the strength of the fire and the gentle attention of Clara had worked miracles. His body felt lighter, and his mind clearer. He realized that he had not just been healing physically, but emotionally as well. For the first time in a long while, he felt safe, understood, and connected. Clara, noticing the change, allowed herself a small sigh of relief.
"You're doing better," she said softly.
Rest a little more, and soon you'll be strong enough to sit up and speak properly. Just take your time.
There's no rush. Jacob managed a faint smile, the first in days, and nodded. He felt gratitude deeper than words, a silent acknowledgement of her care and patience. That night, as the fire burned steadily, Jacob slept peacefully, his body finally allowing itself to recover. Clara sat nearby, watching the flames, thinking of the journey he had endured and the courage he had shown. She knew the days ahead would bring challenges, but she also knew that this night had changed something fundamental in both of them. A bond had formed, a quiet, unspoken trust that neither could ignore. Outside, the desert lay silent under the starry sky. The wind had calmed, and the sands rested, as if nature itself had paused to allow this fragile human connection to grow. In the warmth of the cabin, Jacob's slow, even breathing mingled with the soft crackle of the fire. Ah! Clara kept watch, not because she had to, but because she wanted to, because she knew that sometimes care and attention were the strongest forces of all. As the night drew on, both of them settled into a quiet rhythm. Jacob slept, his body fighting the last remnants of the fever. Clara tended the fire, her eyes flickering between the flames and the man who had come to her door, weak and alone. Neither spoke, but the silence was filled with trust, comfort, and a sense of hope. The small cabin had become a haven, a place where wounds could heal and hearts could begin to open. The night outside the cabin had grown darker, the stars twinkling faintly in the cold desert sky. Inside, the fire cast flickering shadows on the walls, warming the small space with its gentle glow. Jacob had rested more steadily now, the fever having broken slightly, but his body was still weak, and his mind clouded by days of exhaustion. Clara moved quietly around the room, checking the blankets, stirring the fire, and preparing a small pot of herbal tea. She had learned over the past 2 days how fragile he had become, and she treated him with care and patience, like one would a young animal or a wounded traveler. Jacob stirred in his sleep, murmuring fragments of thoughts. At first, they were disconnected, memories of trails, storms, and lonely nights, but gradually they began to form into more complete sentences, revealing secrets he had never told anyone. I lost the ranch, my family, he whispered, his voice barely audible. Clara leaned closer, her hand gently resting on his arm to steady him. "It's all right," she said softly. "You don't have to speak if you're too tired, but I'm here if you want to tell me." I thought I could make it alone, always alone. Nobody cares. His words trembled, weak but filled with raw honesty. Clara stayed silent, only nodding and keeping her eyes warm and encouraging, back into of the vulnerability he was showing. And she understood that this was not just about physical illness. It was about the burden of loneliness he had carried all his life. He coughed violently, and Clara moved quickly, supporting him and offering a sip of water. "Your body is strong, even if it feels weak," she said gently. "You've survived long days and hard trails. Now let your body rest and heal."
You don't have to be strong all the time.
Her voice was calm, steady, and full of understanding. For Jacob, hearing these words from someone who truly seemed to care was almost overwhelming. He had spent years proving himself to others, always hiding his weakness, and now, for the first time, he could simply be vulnerable. Hours passed, and Jacob's fever remained stubborn, rising again and again. Clara stayed by his side, tending to him tirelessly. She whispered words of encouragement when he stirred, adjusted the fire so it burned evenly, and carefully applied herbal compresses to his forehead and chest.
"It's all right," she murmured.
"You're safe here. Sleep, and I'll keep watch."
"Nothing will harm you tonight."
Her voice carried a strength that belied her gentle manner, and Jacob clung to it as if it were a lifeline. During one particularly fevered dream, Jacob found himself riding across a vast desert, chased by shadows that whispered doubts and fears. He called out for help, but no one answered. Just when he thought he would be swallowed by the endless sand, a warm light appeared ahead. He recognized it. It was the glow of Clara's fire. Her voice cut through the dream, soft but firm. "You're not alone. I'm here." Jacob felt a strange comfort in her words, a sense of hope he had almost forgotten existed. Even in sleep, he realized he could trust someone to be there for him. When he woke, he saw Clara tending the fire, her face calm but alert.
"You spoke in your sleep?" she said softly.
"I heard your fears, and it's all right. You're allowed to feel them." Jacob tried to speak, but his voice cracked, so he simply nodded. For the first time, he realized that being cared for did not make him weak. It made him human. And in Clara's presence, he did not feel the need to hide his vulnerabilities. As the night deepened, an unexpected sound reached the cabin from outside, a low, eerie howl of coyotes in the distance. Jacob flinched, still weak from the fever, and Clara's eyes narrowed slightly. "Desk!" She rose quickly, moving to the window and peering into the darkness. "They're far enough away," she said calmly, but her hand rested lightly on a wooden staff she kept nearby for protection. Jacob watched her, amazed at her quiet courage. Despite his own weakness, he felt safer knowing she was there. The howling grew louder, closer, and Jacob's fear flared. I can't, he muttered, his voice breaking. Clara knelt beside him, placing her hand gently on his shoulder.
You don't have to face it alone, she said. I'll keep the fire burning, and I'll keep watch. Just stay here, safe and warm.
Her words had a calming effect, and Jacob, though trembling, felt a sense of relief. The danger outside was real, but with Clara by his side, it seemed manageable. The coyotes circled the cabin, their eyes reflecting the faint light from the fire. Clara moved quietly, throwing small pieces of wood into the flames to make them flare, sending shadows dancing across the walls. She whispered softly, as if speaking to the animals, her calm presence making the night less frightening. Jacob watched, fascinated. He realized that courage was not the absence of fear, but the quiet strength to protect and care even in the face of it. Hours later, the coyotes moved on, and the desert returned to its quiet stillness. Jacob's body was exhausted, but he felt a strange sense of peace. He had faced not only the fever, but also the fear of being helpless, and he had survived with Clara's help. He began to speak more openly about his past, sharing stories of the ranch he had lost, the friends he had left behind, and the loneliness that had followed him for years. Clara listened patiently, never judging, simply acknowledging his pain and offering comfort. "You've carried so much alone," she said gently. "It's no wonder your body and mind are tired. But now, you're not alone anymore. You have a safe place and someone who cares." Jacob felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes. He was a man who rarely cried, a cowboy who had faced storms, wild animals, and dangerous trails. Yet here he was, overwhelmed by simple kindness. He realized that trust and care could be as powerful as any skill or weapon he had ever possessed. The fire flickered, casting long shadows across the room, and Jacob drifted in and out of sleep. Clara continued her vigil, adding wood, adjusting blankets, and speaking softly whenever he murmured. She felt a growing attachment to this man who had stumbled into her life, weak and vulnerable, yet possessing a quiet strength she admired. She understood that the bond forming between them was fragile but significant, built on trust, care, and shared experiences. During another fevered moment, Jacob whispered something that surprised even him. I didn't think I could let anyone in but you."
You make it easy. Clara's hand rested lightly on his, steadying him. That's because you're allowed to be human, she said.
Some people are meant to help, not to judge. Jasper felt a warmth in his chest, a feeling he had not experienced in years, hope, trust, and the gentle strength of connection. The night dragged on, but both of them remained vigilant. Best. Clara occasionally glanced out the window, ensuring no new dangers approached, while Jacob rested, his body slowly regaining strength. The fire burned steadily, a symbol of life, safety, and the bond forming between them. In that quiet cabin surrounded by the vast, unforgiving desert, two lives intersected in a way neither could have predicted. As the hours passed, Jacob's fever finally began to lessen. His breathing became more even, and his body relaxed for longer stretches of sleep. Clara allowed herself a brief sigh of relief. She had faced many challenges in her life, but tending to someone so vulnerable and watching them slowly recover carried its own deep satisfaction. She knew that Jacob's strength would return, but the real change was happening in their hearts, a silent understanding, a trust forged in the quiet moments of fear, care, and honesty. By the time the first hints of dawn touched the horizon, painting the desert sky in soft golds and pinks, Jacob was awake. He felt weak, yes, but clearer than he had in days. Despair, His eyes met Clara's, and for the first time he felt gratitude beyond words. He realized he had been given more than care. He had been given understanding, patience, and the warmth of someone who truly saw him.
Clara smiled faintly, acknowledging his glance without speaking.
Their connection did not need words. It was already deeply rooted. Jacob managed a small, unsteady movement toward the fire, feeling the warmth on his face.
He tried to speak, but his voice cracked. Clara moved closer, supporting him.
"Take your time," she said softly. "You're stronger than you think, and I'll stay here until you're ready." Her patience and gentleness humbled him. He had faced countless dangers and endured endless hardships, but this, the quiet care of someone who did not demand anything in return, was something entirely new. The fire burned steadily, the shadows dancing across the walls, while the desert outside remained silent and still. Jacob leaned back, closing his eyes briefly, feeling the lingering effects of the fever. Clara remained by his side, her presence unwavering. She knew the journey ahead would have challenges, but she also understood that the night had changed something fundamental in both of them. They had survived not just the fever, but the fears and vulnerabilities that came with it. And in the quiet hours of the night, amidst the crackling of the fire and the vast emptiness of the desert, a bond had formed. A trust, a connection, a beginning of something neither of them could fully explain yet. The sun rose slowly over the desert, spilling golden light across the rolling sands and painting the horizon in shades of pink and orange. Inside the small cabin, the fire had burned low, leaving a gentle warmth in the room, enough to chase away the last chill of the night. Jacob stirred, blinking against the light, feeling the comforting heat of the fire on his face. For the first time in days, he realized that the crushing weight of the fever had lifted. His body, though still weak, felt lighter, more manageable. His muscles no longer ached as painfully, and his head throbbed far less. He had survived the night, and the world seemed softer somehow. Clara was already awake, tending to the fire and arranging the small cabin. Her movements were quiet, precise, but careful, as if every action mattered not just for comfort, but for the sense of order in the room. When she saw Jacob stirring, she offered a soft smile. "Good morning," she said, her voice calm but warm.
You slept well.
"How are you feeling?" Jacob tried to speak, and this time his voice was stronger. "Better," he said simply, his lips curving into a faint, grateful smile.
Much better.
Clara nodded, pleased, though she did not let herself show too much relief. She moved closer and handed him a cup of warm tea.
"Drink this slowly. Your body needs strength, not haste." Jacob accepted it with trembling hands, feeling the warmth spread through him as he sipped carefully. The tea was simple, but in that moment, it felt like the most comforting thing in the world. He could feel his strength returning, not fully, but enough to lift his spirits and clear his mind. As he rested, his eyes wandered around the cabin, taking in the small details he had not noticed before. The shelves of herbs, the neat bundles of blankets, the way the firelight made the room glow softly. It all felt like a sanctuary. Jacob realized how much he had taken care of himself while traveling alone, how much he had relied on his own strength and stubbornness, and how different it felt to have someone else watch over him with such quiet patience. Clara's presence had been a steady comfort, a warm light in the darkness of his fevered nights. "You've taken care of me," he said finally, his voice soft but sincere. I don't know how to thank you." Clara shook her head gently, her eyes calm.
No thanks are needed, she replied.
"You came here exhausted, weak, and alone. I just did what anyone would do. Rest. That's the first step to healing." Jacob studied her face, noticing the gentle determination there, the kind that could face the harsh desert winds without faltering. He realized that her care had not been casual. She had chosen to be there for him, to watch the fire and to protect him, and for that he felt a deep, quiet gratitude. Slowly he began to sit up, still careful with every movement. Clara adjusted the blankets around him and supported his back. "Take your time," she said softly.
There's no rush. You've been through a lot, and your body needs to regain strength gradually. Jacob nodded, feeling a strange mix of humility and relief. For so long he had been forced to hide his weaknesses, to pretend he could handle everything alone. But now he understood that strength could take many forms. Sometimes it was the courage to fight through a storm, sometimes it was the courage to accept help. The morning air outside was crisp and cool, drifting gently through the open windows. Jacob leaned closer to the fire, letting its warmth fill him completely. Clara moved about the room, preparing a simple breakfast of bread and eggs. She offered it to him and he accepted, feeling his appetite slowly return. As he ate, he realized that he had taken so much for granted in his solitary life. The taste of food, the warmth of a fire, and the quiet presence of another person. These simple comforts now felt profound, almost magical. They spoke softly, sharing small stories of their lives. Jacob told her about the ranch he had grown up on, the long days of work, and the trails he had traveled alone. Clara listened patiently, asking gentle questions, offering small insights and understanding. Presence made him feel safe enough to share not just the events of his life, but also the feelings he had buried for years: loneliness, fear, and the quiet longing for connection.
He realized that in telling his story, he was healing as much emotionally as physically.
Hours passed in this quiet rhythm of care and conversation. Jacob's strength returned gradually, and he began to help with small tasks around the cabin. He carried firewood, fetched water, and even helped prepare the small meal. Each action, though minor, filled him with a renewed sense of purpose. Clara watched him with a soft smile, knowing that his recovery was more than just physical. It was the restoration of his spirit, his trust, and his hope. As the sun climbed higher, Jacob looked outside at the endless desert stretching before him. The wind rustled gently through the bushes, and the sand shimmered in the bright sunlight. He realized that the desert, which had seemed so harsh and unforgiving, had brought him to this place, to this person, to this moment. And for the first time, he did not feel alone. He had been given a second chance, not just at survival, but at connection and trust. Clara joined him by the fire, carrying a small basket of fresh bread. She handed him a piece, and they shared a quiet laugh at how simple but satisfying the food tasted. "You've done well," she said softly. "Your body is stronger, your mind clearer, and your spirit, well, that's harder to measure, but I can see it improving." Jacob smiled, feeling a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the fire. He realized that the bond they had formed over the past days, through vulnerability, care, and patience, was something rare, something worth holding on to. They spent the rest of the day in quiet companionship. Jacob moved more confidently, helping Clara with chores, tending the fire, and even venturing briefly outside to feel the desert air on his face. Each small step made him feel more alive, more capable, and more grateful. Clara remained close, offering guidance and support when needed, but also giving him space to regain his independence. Their trust in each other had deepened, unspoken but undeniable. As evening approached, the desert sky turned to shades of orange and purple, the first hints of night returning. Jacob and Clara sat together by the fire, sharing stories and memories. He spoke of the trails he had traveled, the challenges he had faced, and the lessons he had learned about resilience and courage. Clara shared her own stories, tales of life in the desert, the solitude she had endured, and the quiet joys she had found in small acts of care. Together they discovered a connection that transcended words, a bond formed from shared experiences, trust, and the comfort of knowing someone cared deeply.
When night fell, the cabin glowed warmly against the darkness outside.
Jacob felt fully rested, his body renewed, and his mind calm. He realized that he had not only recovered from his fever, but he had also gained something far more valuable, a sense of belonging, a recognition that even a solitary cowboy could find connection and care. He looked at Clara, feeling a mixture of gratitude, admiration, and a quiet hope for the future. Clara smiled at him, sensing his thoughts. "Ah, you're ready," she said softly. "Ready to face the desert again, but stronger, wiser, and not alone. You can go forward knowing that you have someone who cares." Jacob nodded, feeling the truth of her words resonate deep within him. He understood now that strength was not just about riding hard or surviving the elements. It was also about allowing others in, sharing trust, and accepting care when needed. Before leaving, Jacob and Clara shared a quiet moment by the fire.
He reached out, lightly touching her hand in gratitude. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice steady and sincere.
"For everything. I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't found you." Clara simply smiled, her eyes warm and kind. "You don't have to know," she said softly. "You're alive, stronger than before, and that's enough." The desert will always be there, but now, so will someone to help if you need it. Jacob prepared to leave the cabin, feeling a mixture of excitement and sadness. He had recovered, ready to return to the trails, but he knew that this place and this person would always hold a special part of his heart. Clara walked with him to the door, her presence steady and reassuring. They shared a final look, a silent understanding that the bond they had formed would remain, even across distances and days of travel. As Jacob mounted his horse and guided it down the trail, he felt a renewed sense of strength, purpose, and hope. The desert stretched endlessly before him, challenging but beautiful, harsh yet full of life. And in his heart he carried the warmth of a small cabin, a glowing fire, and a woman who had shown him that even the strongest must sometimes accept help, care, and trust. The wind whispered around him as he rode, carrying the scent of the desert and the memory of the nights he had spent recovering by the fire. He felt the sun on his face, the steady rhythm of the horse beneath him, and the quiet knowledge that he was no longer truly alone. The world was vast and sometimes harsh, but he had discovered that connection, care, and trust could make even the loneliest journey bearable. With a final glance back at the small cabin nestled in the desert, Jacob smiled faintly, knowing he would return one day, not just for gratitude, but because some bonds once formed were too precious to ignore. He rode forward stronger, wiser, and full of hope, ready to face whatever the vast desert had in store, carrying with him the memory of nights filled with care, warmth, and the quiet strength of human connection.